Good afternoon. I'm Michael Hammond. I'm the lead for the team that works on extensions.
Yes, and I'm Esben Kristoffersen. I'm an architect on the team who works on compilers and developer experience.
And today we're going to talk about both of those topics in some depth and look at what we're doing going forward as well. So today we want to understand extensions a little bit. This is something that we've talked about a lot. I think most people are starting to understand it, but we want to reinforce just a little bit why we're doing extensions, where to use them, and how to start using them today. Also, we want to talk to some of the enhancements that we've done in NAV 2017, the new features we've added to make them more robust. We want to take a long look at the new developer experience, understand the ways this can be used, the ways to reference code that does not come from extensions, and then we want to get everybody excited about the opportunities that are coming down the line, the new tools, the way that these can be leveraged in business cases, and start talking about how to move forward on that. So, like I said, the first thing we want to dive in is talk a little bit about, okay, we've done things the same way for 20-some years, and now we have extensions. How does that fit in? What's the difference? When should I use both? And the first thing we'll talk about is, when we talk about customizations, that's the source code modification that you've done in the past. You can go in, you can modify the objects, you can still create your new objects. It's basically what you've been doing. And when you're doing this model, again, it's going in and making changes to the existing objects. Everybody on the system has the same thing if you're running in a multi-tenant environment when you're doing this. Upgrades, depending on the patterns you're using, can be a little more complex. But you've customized this to be a lot of cases for the specific customer you're looking at. When we start talking about extensions, we're talking about adding new objects that modify the behavior of the existing objects, and being able to put these on very easily, being able to install them, upgrade them as part of the process, minimizing the cost and time it takes to do an upgrade, simplifying that. The new concepts we've added, such as events, where you no longer need your code in the page or table or code unit. You can write code separate from that and still influence the behavior of the application. You can think of these as modules that you can put in place. You can put multiple modules in place on the same system. They should work well together. We've tried to define a tool set and patterns that support that. And again, I talked about the upgrade. When V2 of the base comes out, your extension, as long as we haven't changed any APIs that you're using, should be able to move across and slide in and continue functioning as they were. So the next thing I want to talk about, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. There's a lot of information here, but one of the questions we got, especially when we released NAV 2016, we got a lot of comments. Some very positive, some were, I like what you're thinking, but Microsoft has a history of starting and not finishing. Some of, that's a nice toy you got there, it's fun to look at. But what I really want to emphasize here is, yes, in NAV 2016, we laid the foundation. We put a lot of support in the platform for the very, very basics of what you need to do that I talked about, that install, that upgrade, the very basic functionality that you can use. And no, it wasn't everything that everybody needed. But when you look at what we've added in 2017, we've really rounded out the feature functionality of, now we have support for all the objects, at least as new objects. We've added things like .NET add-ins, ways to work with data, support for translation, and some upgrades to some of the APIs that we had to make some of the problems that we were seeing, some of the things that were complex, much easier. And I'll talk a little bit about that more soon. But then also the future vision. We're invested in this. We're continuing to invest in this, and hopefully by the time we're done, you'll see a roadmap here that we have, that we're set out, and that we're committed to what we're doing. And some of the things here that I really want to call out in the future vision on this slide, because I don't talk about them elsewhere, but if you look at the platform improvements, things like support for per-tenant profiles, ability to remove setup records on uninstall. The reason I want to call these out is not necessarily because they're huge, but these are feedback that you've given us. These are the scenarios that you're having difficulty with today, and we know we need to take those and make them better, make them easier, make them work more fully. So as we're going through this, and we've had a lot of discussions, and this doesn't mean you get everything you ask for. This is not a blank check. But we are listening to feedback and trying to understand what the scenarios are and what the proper ways are to address them. So we've gotten a lot of good feedback. Please keep that coming in, and we will continue to listen on that. So I want to dive in now to the things we've added in NAV 2017, and just go through this list quick, talk briefly about all of them. So one of the scenarios we had was, I have a lot of data in my application. How do I get that into the running system? How do I manage that? And the way it was done in NAV 2016 was, you have code units, go write your code unit and push all the data in, which is not a great way to do it. It works, but there's better ways that can be done. So the way we've supported this today is if you add a non-company table, so something that goes across the tenant, you can fill that up with the data you want through either the UI for whatever tool you want, and then we've added a new commandlet to export that data into a file, the export nav app table data. And what happens then when you get that file is you put that in the folder of your sources, like you do your objects that you're adding. That gets added to the extension package. And once that's in the extension package, on install, there's a new function that you can call. It's the navapp.loadPackageData, passing the ID of the table. And we will go push all that data into that table. And again, that's a per tenant table, not a per company table. And the first question we get is, why did you do that? Well, the main reason we did that is there are scenarios that you need to think about when you're using this of what happens when a new company gets created. What happens if you're doing something else in those companies. And by putting it in the per tenant table, if it's shared data that can be leveraged, it can be referenced across there, that's great. Otherwise, the developer is responsible for getting it into the correct tables in the system that they want. The second feature is custom report layouts. Again, these are very similarly used. You create your report layout, put it in the source folder, and it then becomes available in the application. Again, you can see the commandlet up there that we have for dealing with that. So this gives you an opportunity to provide new layouts on top of existing reports. The next one on this slide is language files. One of the problems with the initial was it works great if you want English, or if you want the default language, or if you're in one locale. How do we deal with stuff where we need the different translations? So we took a look at the way NAV was doing translations, and we now allow the language files to be packaged in extensions as well. The other thing of note at the bottom is we have, with the translation files, typically you replace all the strings that are in that file. And sometimes you want to add a new translation to the system. And with that, you don't want to overwrite existing systems, so we changed this to work on not the whole file, but on a delta basis, like we've done a lot of other things. So we added the compare nav application object language commandlet. And that allows you then to change only the strings that you need to. If you're adding a new language, you can add just that language, and multiple extensions can add different languages without overwriting each other. Per tenant web services. Like we did permission sets in 2016 and 2017, we've added the ability to publish web services as part of the package. So if you are adding new forms, new queries, code units that you want to publish as web services every time your extension is installed, you're now able to do that. And web services can also be published on a per tenant basis. You no longer have to publish them for everybody on the system. Again, if these are in your package or in your extension package, on the install, they will be published automatically. .NET add-in support. There's a couple of different ways to do .NET add-ins, and that's caused a little bit of confusion about this feature. If you are currently pushing stuff to the GAC, that's not the way that this is going to work. So there is some documentation about how to package your add-ins in zip files. That's on MSDN, if you can find that information. That's the way you need to package your add-ins. We do support the server-side .NET, client-side JavaScript, and client-side WinForms. All of them are supported, but you need to get them in that zip file. And again, put that zip file in your source folder, and it will be used. The other thing I want to talk about when I talk about .NET add-ins is if you're doing an on-prem deployment, or if you are doing your hosting, you can use .NET as you see fit, or as you and your customer or the partner that's doing the hosting agree to. If you're going to push code to Dynamics 365, at some point we will not be supporting .NET. We realize today that there are some things that you can only do with .NET. For example, the client-side JavaScript add-ins need a .NET interface for NAV to talk to. Service accessibility is mostly done through .NET today, that we don't have a good mechanism for that. These are APIs that we will be adding over time, so you no longer need the .NET. But if you're putting things like business logic inside of .NET, that will failure validation when you try to submit to Dynamics 365. We do scrutinize very carefully what goes into the .NET assemblies because of the security risk it poses. Debugging, we've added better support for. So the debugger now finds extension code. You're able to debug it, set breakpoints. It works with the profiler. So we've done some work to improve the tools there to make developing a better experience. And the last thing is, when we started out with extensions, everything was a commandlet. We had lots of commandlets, and some people, that was okay. That meant they could script everything. They loved it. Other people, it was difficult to deal with. One of the common scenarios, though, is when a customer needs to install an extension, it's a difficult scenario for them to get access to PowerShell, number one. They may not have it depending on their environment. And number two, it's the average customer doesn't always understand what they need to do in PowerShell to make this work. So we've added the new extension management page inside the application. As you've seen earlier, this uses the images that were added. So there's some information now in extensions as well for images, and this is where that information gets displayed. So excuse me, friendly for the users here. And they can go in, see what's installed, and also choose to install new extensions. If you're on Dynamics 365, this page functions a little bit differently. It only shows the ones that are currently installed in the tenant, and AppSource is the mechanism that's used to go find and install new extensions, which is available from the extension management page. So, kind of wrapping up here, extensions in general. They are the only way to publish code to Dynamics 365, to our SaaS service. So some people have kind of pushed off looking at extensions saying, I don't need that, I don't care about it. If you want to be on Dynamics 365, it has to be in the form of an extension. AppSource, some of the benefits of using that is free advertising. This is where a lot of most of Microsoft's business products are going to be available, where the extensions are going to be available. So this is a place that businesses will hopefully come to see as the place to go to find out what's available. So if customers are out there already, it's a good opportunity to have your product out there as well, something that they can search for, something that they can find and use. And part of this too is if we look at the model historically for NAV, where we talked about the sales funnel in the keynote, where you're going to find those customers spending a lot of time. This is one of those places where customers are going to be. They can go all the way through the pipeline themselves, and you can have a customer up and running your stuff that you had zero touch with and start collecting revenue off of that customer. So we talked about upgrade. How extensions are meant to be easily upgradable. There have been some concerns about performance, especially with large data. We are currently looking at ways to make that better, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on in more detail. When we talk about AppSource, the only people that ever see the extension package are you and Microsoft that have any access to that at all. So one of the concerns has been IP, not just around extensions, but NAV code in general. So this is one way where you no longer have to ship out your code to a whole bunch of customers, other partners that need to work with it. It's available in that one location, and they never actually get to download the extension file. Esben.
Yeah. And now to something completely different. It's no secret that we over the years have spent a lot of time internally talking about the audience for our developer tools. We have been wanting to, have a broader appeal to the younger developers, and we have, as Marco Peresic mentioned at the keynote at Directions, he was talking about the coffee shop developers, young people sitting with their fruity flavored laptops at coffee shops, Starbucks, coding in PHP, Go, or some other cool modern language. And we have had the feeling that Seaside as such was not really cool and attractive enough for that. And so we have had many and long discussions around that over the years, and one of the things we have noticed is that, even though that we as Microsoft think that the app that we deliver out of the box is fine, finished, and perfect, you always seem to have something you want to fix change or because we did it wrong. So we know that good developer tools are important. So even though that we have been talking about these coffee shop developers, we also think that this new tooling are meant for you and as a big upgrade. And that's really important to stress that this is not only to attract new developers, it's certainly also to make sure that you all have a better tool set than what you have today. To try to talk you through the process that we have been through, this one?
Yes.
Over the years. I will start with this. And I mean, everyone loves a classic, right? And that's probably why they became classic at the beginning. It was affordable. Everyone loved the simplicity. And I mean, even using air pressure to drive the windshield washer fluid seemed like a good idea back then. So did the F5 IntelliSense baked into Seaside. Over the years, we added a number of improvements. We added a new editor. This one got new rims and a paint job. Something else. We also added new reporting. I mean, not all of the improvements were equally successful, but we have improved. But at some stage, I mean, even classics, they're getting old. It's not, thrill is gone, it's not the same. And you start thinking about, I mean, what should the new one look like? I mean, how can I get a new classic? All the new ones, they are more intelligent, they are faster. And so you begin wondering about, I mean, how should it look like? What is a good next iteration? And clearly, I mean, you could go with something, same color, same shape, but I mean, it's probably not going to be a classic, even if we fixed all the small annoyances, like, I mean, if the date is in another format, you can now import the text files. If 12 is not working all the places, even if we fixed all that, I'm not sure that this is actually what we would like to end up with. So we did some more thinking. I mean, maybe it's time for a real change, and maybe something pointing more towards the future, right? We could keep the color, but I mean, get the latest technologies and update it over the air, stuff like that. So maybe there's another way. And actually, I mean, I have this pictures here is running inside this new idea because it's actually within Visual Studio Code, which is our new development tool that this is running. And I have used the Markdown language, which it supports internally. Let me just go here. And as you can see, we actually have some toolbar on the left side here, and down here there's one called extensions, and you can see it's prompting me. I don't know if I can make it larger. Zoom in a bit, yeah. Do one more. There's at the left side, there's a notification saying it's actually ready to be updated over there. In this case, it's the C# extension I have installed. But even more important on top of that, there's a new extension in there, which is the A language, which is the one that we are going to use. So let me jump away from this presentation one and pick a small demo. And I'll just hide that. Oops. Do away with. There. One of the things, one of the big pains with Seaside over the years has always been the way it handled any character and any character not included between A and C. So I actually took the opportunity here to show that with the new environment, we are fully supporting Unicode. You can write, I mean, your text files with all the different languages you can enable. And I actually chose to do Hello World. And since my own language skills are limited to English and Danish, I used Bing Translator to get a few other examples here, and you can see it's handled gracefully. So let me add some code here. Let me add my own favorite here at the bottom. And do it like this. And as you can see, as soon as I start typing, I immediately get instant feedback from the compiler which is running in the background. So I can type along here, and as you can see while I'm typing, the error messages are changing. Danish, high Verden, like this. And all the red ones are gone. So let me scroll up a bit here. And as you can see, I mean, we have preserved the important part, the AL language itself. We have had to make some changes to the source files because frankly, the current text files are not really useful for writing anything just by hand. I mean, there's a lot of white space, reliance and stuff like that. We have gotten rid of that. And if you want to, you can actually write a code unit on a single line. I will not recommend it, but it's possible. So let us compile this, and I'll do this by doing Control-Shift-B. And as you see, a couple of things are now happening. On the top, I get the information that a default manifest file has been created for me. And down at the bottom, there's an output window. And what goes there is actually the output from the new command line compiler, which is a true command line compiler. You compile source files into a package which can be deployed. And if we look over here, File Explorer, you see I got the app.json file here, and I got another file which has the extension navm for now. That is the compiled output. And if we look at the app.json file here, you will notice that there's a lot of similarities with the manifest file that you're using for the current extensions. So, but let's just correct this a bit. Call it hello world. And this one should be Microsoft, like that. And we can build again. And it creates another one, actually with a new name, I suggested. Then you notice here there's another icon out here who got a number 2 on it, which is actually the built-in Git integration. Because I added a new file here and I made some changes to the other one, I actually automatically get this, listed as changes because I put this in Git. Very nice and very convenient. So, but let's close this one here and create a new code unit. Do it like this. Create hello world.al. Sorry. And as you can see, what you get here is just, basically a blank piece of paper. And to make it a bit more easy to get going, we have added some snippets. So if I type CC, I get a suggestion here, example, code unit with one run trigger. I like that one. Fortunately, we still have the IDs, but we are working on it. Give it a name, hello world, like that. And then I actually want to do a message box calling the methods from the other code unit. So I'll add a variable here, and notice no dialogues. Do it like this, greetings. Code unit. And now it actually loads all the known code units from W1, which are the one I'm building on here. But right now, I'm just interested in the greetings management, the other one I have in my project here. And then I'll do the message box. So I can start typing, and actually we got IntelliSense here as well, suggesting all the built-in methods. I can type a couple more. Do it like this. And I I get some useful information about how it works, but what I want to do is actually use the variable here, greetings, call the get random greeting, like that. Boom. That's it. Let us compile that again. Fine, it works, compiles. But if you're not really building the compiler, it's probably not that fun at this stage because I have just compiled some files and stuck it into another file. So I think we should try to deploy it. That will probably make more fun out of it. And I know Thomas at the keynote talked about how complex it were previously when you did extensions and had to do a lot of steps. So we boiled it down to one. Take your finger, press F5 here, and just need to have focus like that. Runs the compiler, and then it up here the first time tells me I need to select an environment. What I'm actually picking is the debugging support for Dynamics 365 for financials. That gives me a launch configuration file. Think about it as where should I deploy this to? So I'll go in here. It's a JSON file. Luckily, I have some IntelliSense in here. So if I do server, fine, I'm deploying to localhost. I need to specify server instance. Main is mine called. And one more thing, because it's local, I need to specify I'm using Windows authentication. Like that. Do F5 again. It's compiling it, packaging it, and now it's publishing to my local server. What I actually should have done, I'll do that, show it to you later. Should have showed you before that this picture was actually empty before I deployed it. But that actually installed the extension. But hey, wait, two code units, no one is calling them. So let's try to wire them up to the existing application instead. And what we can do is actually to go back in here and use one of the new extension objects we have added, namely a page extension. So I will add one called customer card extension. .al, like this. Again, I will use a snippet to get started. And give it an ID. One customer card extension. This one here should extend the customer card. Like that. Now I have two different sections. I have one which is called layout, which is all about the controls, groups and all that. But in this case, I'm going to add an action instead. So I'll go down to the other one here, the action section. And what we have added here is the ability to very, very specifically to specify what you exactly want to do. In this case, I want to add an action first within a group. And I will actually add it, just to pick the first one, the customer group here. And I will then, add the action here. I will call it say hello. Like that. Notice again if we go here. And then I will do, and as you can see again, I have IntelliSense here. I will do run object on code unit. In this case, the hello world one I did before. So I will also like to put an image on it. And I will pick map because it looks like world. Let's also just put it in a promoted category. Let's pick 8. Now I got some information here, down here, saying that can only use promoted if I promote a category, if I set promoted to true, so I'll do that. Like this. And again, I will build and deploy. Like that. Let's go back here. Go to the customer card. One here, and actually you can see up here we have the say hello action, and if I click it, I get hello world. I think we are back to, yeah. So, what did we just see here? I mean, we saw Dynamics 365 for financials, or actually it was the on-prem version, we call Dynamics NAV. Visual Studio Code, and we saw the NAV extension we have built for Visual Studio Code with IntelliSense, background compilation, syntax highlighting, auto-completion, snippets, navigation, Unicode and source, all the good stuff that you would expect from a modern development. We saw an extension object, the new page extension, and we saw how easy it actually is to build, package, and run an integration. Yeah. So, a little bit more about Visual Studio Code. First of all, it's free. I mean, who doesn't like that? It's not Visual Studio, but recently the Visual Studio Code group became a part of the Visual Studio group internally in Microsoft. It's optimized for code, and there's also a debugger integration, which we haven't, it's not ready yet, but we'll get there. And there's built-in native Git support. I showed you that. It's so nice. I mean, I have been running my demos out of a small Git repository locally, and I can just revert them back whenever I'm done with my demo. It's updated monthly if you're using the normal one, or if you want to be more adventurous, there's also nightly build. It runs on Windows and Mac and Linux platforms. It supports a ton of extensions. I mean, there's more than 1,600 the last time I looked. And there's a huge community around it. It's open sourced on GitHub, and I mean, there's lots of people basically coming with suggestions, and then they are very good at fixing unwanted features, stuff like that, and adding new improvements. So it's a great tool.
So we've talked a lot about Visual Studio Code, and it's very much a tool targeted at what we call the pro developer, somebody that likes to get in, get their hands dirty, knows what they're doing very, very much. And this slide is called Two Sides of the Same Coin, which I don't think is quite right, really, because really you have a spectrum of developers. You have people who show me the source code, everything else gets in my way. That's all I want. You have developers that, yeah, I know source code, I can go in and work with it, but I'd really prefer some kind of visual designer. And all the way along that spectrum until you get to the far end of the spectrum, which is the minute I see code, I'm out. I'm done at that point. And those are people that we don't typically think of as developers, but oftentimes they're people in a company that want to do simple modifications. How do I change the layout of stuff? How do I add a new field to store some extra data? I don't need any business logic tied to it. I just need something simple. And one of the things that, talking to those companies, if they have to call somebody and pay a large check every time they need something simple done, it's a real turnoff to the way, or to their view of the application. It becomes an impediment to them doing their business, which is really what they care about, not the software. So the next thing that we've got that we're going to show, and we've seen this already this morning, is the in-client designer. And we had some new updates that unfortunately I don't have them in my environment. They were done earlier this week, but I was unfortunately on a plane at that point already, and I was afraid to take them this morning just because I know how things like that go. But talking about the in-client designer, so if I navigate to the customer page, which is one we talk about quite a bit, And as you saw this morning, when you get here, you can do the simple things. If partner code doesn't matter to me as much, I can move it down to the bottom, out of the way. I should be able to. So we'll try again. So now, hopefully, nope, that one's not going to work for me. We'll hope the rest of this stuff goes. I can do simple things like change the titles. So I can change it from general to main. I can do those simple types of customizations. We will have support for changing field captions as well soon. I can do other things like adding new fields to the page, fingers crossed. So I can drag name 2 on. Okay. So moving along, we won't be that one, but I can come in and create new fields as well. So if I want to create a loyalty rewards program, do something simple, come in and say the values that I want. If it's gold, silver, bronze, and the initial should always be bronze. Go ahead and finish that. When I come into my new fields now, I can search, and I can see loyalty. And I'm sure this is going to go the same as the others, but we'll try it anyway. Yep. Okay, so take my word for it, it works. It's just apparently something I did here. So we've showed a lot of this already, but these are the types of things that, as we talk about that far opposite end of the spectrum, these are what those users want to do. And it being right in the app gives them, they don't have to go download a separate tool, they don't have to go learn something else. It's just natively available to them in the tool that hopefully they're becoming familiar with. So what else can we do here in the designer? If I go to stop designing, one of the things we're looking at is eventually being able to use these, because they're simple UI customizations in a lot of cases, a lot of it can be done for personalization as well. So we're investing a lot into the designer that we're creating here, and there's not a great personalization story yet for the web client. It would make a lot of sense to use this for both personalization and the role-based profiles as well. So being able to make the changes here and save those out. Now there will be some restrictions on that. Obviously if you add a field to a table, that happens for everybody in the company, so you can't do that, add a custom field just for yourself. But as much as we can, we want to leverage the investment for all these scenarios. And again, that goes back to, let's keep it simple for the end user. Let's give them a consistent experience on what's happening. If we look at I guess the other thing here then is save for everybody. That's the build an extension and make it available for your tenant right away. Publish the store. If I've done something that is useful, maybe I've customized it, at least in verbiage and such for vertical, I might want to make that available to other people so they can use it as well. So pushing that up to app source. So that's what we have there. I'm going to try something else here and see how it works. I don't have this UI all finished out. There's actually, this should be available soon for us internally, and then it will be available in December, I hope. But we started a new page setup dialog. And if you probably can't read, maybe you can read the description down there a little bit. But basically what the description is saying, the checkbox is card details. I want to create a card page. But in NAV, you very rarely create just a card page. There's other things involved with that. You create navigation that goes to a list page. Then from the list page, you hook that up to the card page. And you share fields and data source between this. So the goal here that we're going after with this design is that we make it as simple as possible to not only create the object you want, but to create the scenario that you want. I realize we have customers in there, but because it's one we're all familiar with, if we want to create a customer card, we typically want the customer list that navigates to the customer card. They share fields, and also hooked up to the navigation. So by clicking this on here, we're actually creating multiple pages, hooking all that background plumbing up that will, again, make it simpler for that end user to do that. And then looking at other experiences, such as if I've customized some data on the card, can we extract enough information to put, maybe not perfectly, but a pretty good guess of what goes on the list page as well, so that they don't have to do everything once, realize they need to navigate somewhere else and do it all again. Can we at least get them pretty close? The final thing I want to talk about with the in-client designer is underneath the covers, this is creating an extension. And this is one of the scenarios that the new compiler that we're investing in allows us to do. With Seaside, it was a standalone application. We had to push all the objects into Seaside, do a compile. We did that off in a separate environment because we didn't want to corrupt the environment that the customer was currently running in. With the new compiler, we can take the file, basically generate the files here through an API around the compiler, take those files, compile them on the command line. They're all file-based now, so we don't have to touch the database. We don't have to worry about setting up a shadow database to do our work in. And then once that's done, we can build it up as an extension and do the publish on the fly, because all that tooling is there now. So the next thing I want to talk about is Esben showed briefly an extension object, in this case a page extension. And we've done it to ourselves again. We've created verbiage that is going to get confusing. We now have extensions, which are the package, and we have extension objects, which is something that modifies another object in the system. So the two that we have right now are page extensions and table extensions. And starting with the developer process of this, I'm sure everybody's favorite thing to do right now is to create the snapshot of the database that you're starting with, make your changes to the object, export the result of that, then compute the deltas, then roll everything back to the original database so that you can build the extension and test what you're doing. Oh, you made a mistake, so take the extension off, start that process over again. It's a lot of work, it's error prone, it's not a great experience. So getting rid of that now, from a development perspective, you never have, if you want to modify the customer page, you never change the code on the customer card again. You now write an extension to the customer card, and you author with intent exactly the changes you need to make. And that with intent is another phrase that we want to talk about. Because today when you modify the customer card, you're basically saying, as you're doing your development, this is what I want the customer card to look like when I'm done. The problem is then you go ahead and compute those deltas, maybe the underlying customer card changes, maybe another extension comes in. It never actually looks like, or may never look like, what you actually authored it to look like. Here now you're describing what the changes you want are, and it's a little easier to understand exactly what you're getting, or again, what your intent is in your authoring, as opposed to doing those modifications the way it had been. And the last point about the development experience around this, because we have the new compiler, because these extension objects are first-class citizens in the compiler understands what you're doing. With Seaside, you could go add code to a page, and I know I've heard this from a lot of people. The first thing they do is they go in and they change a key on it. They change the primary key on a table. Go in and add code to a page or a table. They spend sometimes weeks developing what they think is the perfect extension, and they never build the extension at that point. They're focused on development, which makes a lot of sense. That's what your intent is to do the development. And then you get to that first time you go build the extension, and the first thing you get is you can't do 50% of what you've just done. Go back and start over and try again. Thanks for playing. That's obviously not the experience we want. So now that the compiler understands these, as you saw from the syntax, the red squiggly lines, it knows exactly what is allowed when you're authoring it, which, again, should improve that experience greatly. So moving on to what this changes in the platform is, again, we talked about them being first-class citizens, and what do we gain by this? So right now, when we do the publish and a customer installs the extension, we end up with multiple copies of the customer card on the platform. We have one that's the base object. We have one that has extension A put into place. We have one that has extension B put into place. We have a third one that has extensions A and B put into place, depending on what customers are using. So we end up with a lot of copies of the customer card, and this has some inefficiencies with it. By moving to extension objects and making them first class in the platform as well, we can have one copy of the customer card metadata that's shared between everybody. We can then have the extensions objects, one copy that's shared between everybody. And as the users come in, we figure out what combination of those we need to put together to get the right information to the client, but we get some efficiencies in the platform. So that goes to the no duplicate objects as well. The next one, we've talked to partners that today say, please, just let me write a little bit of code on the page. Just let me write a little bit of code on the table. There's something that I need to do that I just can't today. I think set filter record, I think, is the API that's only available on cur page. So I can have an event that I get called when it gets called when the event fires that I care about, but I don't have access to the APIs or the information inside the page that I need to do what I want to do with that. with these being new objects now, all the reasons that we've said we're not going to allow code, those now go away because this is a new object. We can expose certain aspects of the page to a page extension, some of those APIs and things. One of the other scenarios was if you add an action to an existing page, you weren't able to write code to that. It was fine if you wanted to just call run object on something. If you didn't need the actual data from the page, you were okay. But there were APIs that sometimes you wanted to call in order to set up the new page that you were going to launch, and that wasn't available. This will give you the opportunity to add code in those places. So going into a demo here, or very short, of what we have here. I have a very simple customization here, and I'm going to look at two objects. So the first is a table extension. And here you can see what we're talking about is I've added a new field to the customer table, and I didn't have to go in and modify the customer table itself. I said exactly what I want to do. I have a new field. Also, you can see the trigger there for onValidate. I can handle that, and I can write my code in there and do things I need. I can add new functions as well and have those called from inside and outside, either of which makes sense. So this will work very similar today as of right now if you're modifying the customer table. But again, you understand exactly what you're doing as you're writing it. There's no more going into the customer table and saying, what parts did I add? What parts were there before? Did I do something I wasn't allowed? It's very straightforward here. And now then with the page extension, you can see the same thing. We talked about the layout. We talked about being able to do add last. And I can take the field that I added from my table extension and add it to the customer card page through a page extension. As Esben showed, we can go add actions. We can add code behind that. We can start hooking things up that way and make it impactful that way, the way we need to. So, and just to show us working here, I launched this, or installed this one earlier. So let's stop designing. And on the customer card, you can see here I have my shoe size with its value. So this is kind of what we're moving towards, trying to make it a little bit more obvious what you're doing during development, make the tools work better for you during development, and take out a lot of the overhead steps that have been there because we were trying to use the tools we had available to us at the time. The next thing I want to talk about that we're doing for an improvement is we're changing the way that data is stored when used by extensions. Today, as you may know, we actually, if you modify the customer table, we actually change the schema of the customer table. The approach that we're taking moving forward will be that we store the data in separate tables. So if you author a table extension, it will get its own table in SQL. Now, there's a couple of things that means, but one of the things is to note about this is you don't have to reference it as a separate table. The table record APIs will take care of getting all that data in place for you, take care of where the data gets stored, which tables they need to write to, doing it in single transactions, that sort of stuff. So the usage of this is very simple, but that storage is separate. So the question is then, why would we take the effort to do that if the API is the same or going to be very close to the same? A couple of problems we've been listening to is naming conflicts. If you extend the customer table and you put a shoe size field on it, and then Microsoft changes the customer table to put a shoe size on it, your extension is broken. It doesn't function anymore because when you try to install it again after the changes, there's two fields in SQL with shoe size. SQL can't handle that. So this will give us the ability to avoid name conflicts, and especially now if two partners add the field shoe size, they can both live in there. And we don't have to worry about all the referencing because the compiler knows that when you are referencing shoe size, you probably care about the one that you added, not the one that somebody else added that you didn't know about at the time. One of the other concerns that we've addressed, or that this helps with, is the upgrade process. Today, with today's upgrade model, we have two separate upgrade models, one for extensions and one for the core application. And the core application, if you upgrade that with extensions in place, there are mechanisms that need to know the entire exact schema of the table to work. And when those happen with an extension in place that has new fields, it doesn't know about the data that the extension's added. And the result of that is, if you do it with the extension in place, it will lose that data as part of the upgrade, which is why our guidance today is always roll your extensions off, upgrade the base application, always put your extensions back on. Because this data from a SQL side is now stored in separate tables, we can mitigate some of those concerns and work on ways around that. And then also, we talked about hyperscale, I think, a little bit this morning. But what the hyperscale is we want to push more, or make available the ability to share schema between tenants. So if you have some very lightweight scenarios, customers that use a little bit of data infrequently, it doesn't always make sense to spin up a whole database for them. The overhead of creating all the schema, the little bit of data they have, you can gain some cogs and efficiencies if they could share a database. By the extensions having their own tables now, part of the problem with putting them into the same database or one of the problems is that if two tenants have different versions of the customer table, how do they share that schema at that point? But if the table extension data is stored in a separate table again, everybody shares the same customer table at that point. If people are using my extension, everybody shares that schema as well. If only 5 people are using Esben's extension, those 5 people can share that piece of the schema, but not everybody else is driven by that. So the companion table here that we've talked about, again, has some efficiencies that way and is something that we intend to leverage going forward more. The last thing I want to say about upgrade, I talked briefly here about some of the things that will allow us to do, and I'm talking some about what it will allow us to do because we're working on changes to the upgrade process overall right now to try and make that a smoother process. Instead of having 2, hopefully we can get down to 1 upgrade process for everything. So more will be coming on that in the future.
Yeah. What I'll show you now is a deeper demo of what you can actually do. It's a small extension we had one of our application developers do. But what I forgot to do before was basically to show you, like the magician, there's only the hello world in here. So I will go back now and add a bit to this extension and then deploy it. But first, I will tell you a bit about it. It's an extension that actually is targeting the UK market. And what is special about the UK market is that their postcodes are actually describing very, very small areas. So if you have a postcode, you can get a list of 10, 20 addresses to pick from. So actually, the postcode is often the main entry field on an address. So if you enter the postcode, you will get a suggested list of addresses more precisely. So what it actually does is it utilizes an external web service where you can send out the postcode and get back the list of addresses. We have added that, and and there's a couple of, I just need to find my mouse here. In here, there's a code unit that does most of the heavy lifting. And if you see here, we have added some additional intelligence here, or symbol lookup, so you can actually navigate through the symbols within the code unit here. We have an even broader one, which allows you to search for any symbol. Let's try on. There's a couple of things that has on in it. We have a data layer with some tables. And as you can see, the table here, we have changed the layout slightly to make it more easy to work within an editor. There's a service connection setup. And then there's a couple of pages. But what I want to do first is actually, I will make a small change to the customer card, because since the postcode is now the preferred entry field, I would actually like to move it in front. So again, what we need is a page extension So I will do another customer card extension. To the L. Again, I would use the snippet feature. Customer card extension. Like that too. Customer card. This time I will go into the layout section. And what I want to do is actually to move the postcode as the first entry in the address details group. So I'll select that. And then I need the postcode like that. And as Michael mentioned, this is very much about stating your intent. I mean, my intent is move the postcode field first in the address section. It's not designing the entire page. It's just this specific action. And that's all I need here. So let's do the F5, build it, and deploy it. So now it has been published to the server. Let's go back in here and do the refresh. And as you can see, I got another extension installed. And if we go in here into the service connection page, see what we have here. We actually have this address setup, which contains the service URL and a key to allow me to actually go out and fetch the addresses for a postcode. So let's go out of this, go back into, let's create a new one. Create a new customer, like that. My customer. And as you can see down here, the postcode field is actually now the first field in the address and contact group, and just by adding that single line. So what how it works is I do like this. Now I know one that should work. And as you can see, we have utilized the notification feature here. I'm being asked now whether I want to look for addresses for this postcode on. Yes, please, I would like that. It looks it up, and I get a nice list of addresses I can pick from. I select one, and it actually fills out the other fields. This is an example of what you can actually do already with the tool set. We have pages, we have tables, we have code units, page extensions, table extensions, and it's actually possible to build, real extensions. Yeah. Is it there? Yeah. So list of syntax changes, and as I mentioned before, we have tried to keep most of the existing text file format as is. We haven't changed the AAL. We have the same methods. We have the same layout. But all the surroundings, the metadata definitions, like how do you define fields, it's changed, but it's changed to make it possible to add comments wherever you like with whack. You can do it next to the option strings defined in the field. And you can write it on one line, do not do it. But it's all about making the layout more writable and readable. And I think we have some page extension and page syntax. She's changed slightly. Rather than having the flat list in the current page format, where the controls are basically the hierarchy are specified by an integer specifying the indentation, we have chosen a hierarchical structure here with some names which lit up or are more visible when you actually look at it because syntax highlighting kicks in. And then we have tried to create a page extension format which are similar as much as possible to the layout for the actual page. Should I?
Okay. So talked a little bit in the beginning about .NET Interop, and we've had a lot of questions about this. Is .NET Interop going to be available? Is it available now in extensions? Is it going to be available in new stuff we're doing? And as I alluded to earlier, it is available now. We support the .NET add-ins. We realize that that's a critical piece to people's business right now, that taking that away would stop a lot of people from building extensions in the first place. Going forward, one of the things we've said is our intent is to get rid of .NET. Now that's probably a little harsh, but we want to prep people for what we decide to do going forward. So right now in the stuff we have, there is no access to .NET. Our goal is in Dynamics 365 that you will not be able to use .NET long-term going forward. As we talked about, this means that there needs to be an alternative though, and we're not going to take away .NET support until we have a good alternative. So a couple of options right now. There are AL objects that expose some .NET wrappers or expose some .NET objects. Those are one mechanism that we have that we could potentially allow things to go forward. The other thing is we would like to have talked about creating some new objects for the common scenarios. And the first thing that goes through people's minds when we have this discussion is, you're getting rid of .NET, you can't do that, it'll never work. And then you say, okay, what do you use .NET for? What are you doing with .NET today that you can't do otherwise? And there are typically 6 things when we talk to people. And if I try to list them off, I'll probably get 4 of them. But there are 6 things that people almost always say, these are what I'm doing. It's, I want to call web services. Once I call web services, I need to get to the data, which means you need XML and JSON APIs, because I need to send that across through the services and I need to parse that coming back. String manipulation is another one. Collections are another one. And as you see, so far, these are things that we could add to the AL language without a lot of difficulty. And the last one we get is JavaScript add-ins, or add-ins in general, but especially the JavaScript add-ins. The interface is defined as a .NET interface. But if you look at that list isn't huge. That list is not unachievable. There are obviously some others that people use just because there's always something that there's a unique case, but 95% of the people we talk to is within that list. So we realize that .NET is important for what people are doing today, and we realize there needs to be a solution for what people are using it for today. The Azure Functions, do you want to talk about that one a little bit?
Yeah, Azure Functions is, I mean, since we are planning to add the ability to call externally to the AL language, I mean, Azure Functions is a feature in Azure where you can write a piece of C# code which is exposed as a as a web service that you can call using a REST API, and our plan is to support that, so it's an easy thing to work with if you have some critical .NET code which are probably should do a larger piece of work and not just, I mean, trying to flip a flag on an Excel spreadsheet, something like that. But it's a way to isolate and park .NET code which is then callable from within AL without compromising the security of our service.
So we've talked some about things that we're doing going forward. A lot of these are near term, we're not too far off, so we have a pretty good handle on those. Obviously, everything is subject to change. What I'm about to talk about now, though, is things that either we've started planning on, or one of them is something that Marco mentioned in a blog, so it's obviously completely defined because he mentioned it publicly. But these things are very much subject to change. Please take everything as this is the direction we're going rather than these are the specifics of what we're doing, especially from this point on. So we talked about solution apps briefly this morning. And if you look at the diagram here, we have an example of the way we'd like to start layering the application. And when I say layers, that has a lot of connotation for some people. It's not that, just we'll get to it in a minute. But if you think about the way things are done today, or were done, let's say 3 years ago in an on-prem world, you had the ball of everything in it. You put the AL code on the platform and that was it. And you went and modified the AL code if you needed something. And there was no separation of what was going on. In NAV 2016, and we've enhanced in 2017, we had extensions, which is that top layer, where now we can start to put modules side by side on top of the solution. You could still do code customization, that was still available, but now you can put these extensions in place. You can put them on, take them off, upgrade them independently. They can work side by side. They don't have to know everything that's going on inside the application to function. So the next step we've started to look at is solution apps. And the first thing that we talk primarily about is that second green box, the one that says ISV solution app. And what we're looking for here is extensions are great for functionality that has limited scope most often. It's where they really hit their sweet spot. But what that allows them to do, what we're looking for with solution apps is, I need deeper customizations. I need to change the business logic, not just react to what's happening within the system. And again, we're starting our design on this, so all subject to change, but we're looking at things like, how do we give you the ability to change the functionality? Right now, we've got the two ends of the spectrum that we have. We've got, I can go in and modify code, and I can go respond to events. Problem with events is there's not enough of them. How do I hook up to somewhere that's not an event? We've talked about, well, do we add pre and post on functions? The thing that we get there then is always, well, what if what I need to change is between line 4 and line 5 of the function, I need to add a new conditional, or I need to add an error message if there's a new case for my logic. So before and after doesn't work. So we're looking at ways potentially to allow you to take control of a function. And this is something that we're able to do in a solution app world because at that point in the application, there is one extension that knows about everything that's below it in the application. And this is where we start talking about stacking and the layers. There's no explicit layers like, I'm at layer 7, 5, whatever. It's at that point in time, I'm building on top of another stack. Whether that's just the platform, whether that's W1, whether that's US or Danish, for example, I can control everything there. So if I take ownership of a function, I know what needs to happen in the rest of the application to go make that work, and I know that nobody else is going to come in and say, we're not going to compete for who's overriding. One of the things that we've looked at here is, we talk a lot about one solution app, but once you get those principles in place, they also apply to a stack of solution apps, which means that if a big vertical creates a solution app, and again, takes that ownership and they know what they're controlling, they have that additional control over the solution, then what's to prevent somebody else from putting another solution app on top of that? I want to customize that for my customer. I want to take the big vertical they did and target it to a very niche vertical, something more specific, or a certain localization or region. They should be able to do that at that point, because again, at that point, even if the bottom solution app did the customization, they took ownership of functions, I can choose to override theirs as well. So now if we've established the stack, what's to prevent us from doing localizations this way? What's to prevent us from doing the W1, the very base of the application, this way? And we're starting to look at maybe how this plays into a stack. And that's part of why we have the boxes around W1 and localizations that covers both what ISVs and Microsoft can do. Is Microsoft has a set of localizations. I think the count is 24 right now. And if we build ours this way and create a model for doing this, this gives ISVs an opportunity to go and create localizations that we don't currently support to get into new markets. So at this point, again, it's solution apps. We're looking at ways to give them more control, to do things that normal extensions can't. They're a little more isolated, and we are working on that right now and doing planning, so hopefully soon we'll have more information on that. The next slide that I'm going to talk about has very little information. It's called customer apps. And mostly I'm going to talk about the problem and that we're starting to think about it right now. Everything that we've done with extensions right now has been targeted a lot towards mass sell. Everything you put in app source, you should be able to get to as many customers as possible, make it widely available. Solution apps, you're going to make your money probably not by creating it for one, but by being able to redistribute it and have a customized, something customized for a vertical or a localization. And if you go to all that work for one customer, you're probably not getting your return on investment that you want. But there is still a need for, if I have everything else in place, that a customer will have some specific needs. They will have something unique to their business that needs to be taken care of. And if the out-of-the-box offerings don't work, they'll probably hire somebody to do customization for them, for their specific cases. So what you can think of this would be applied on top of everything else, but would probably have control more similar to solution apps. And when we start talking about Dynamics 365 and App Source, this would be something that you wouldn't have to publish to App Source available for everybody. We need to find a way to make this available to the specific customer that you're working with. So the last thing that I want to talk about today is we provided you with a lot of information, so the question we get is, what do I do with all this? And what we would love to say is, go change your code into extensions and mass sell it. That would be ideal, but that's not always realistic yet. That doesn't always work. And this takes time, and there's steps that you can get to be ready for this, even if you can't get all the way there yet. The first one is start refactoring your code. There's a lot of good practices out there. The one I call out here is the hook pattern, where you start to isolate the number of objects you're modifying. And whether you go to extensions or not, this is a good thing to do. It makes your upgrades easier, helps you when you're upgrading your customers, because you're not as integrated into the Microsoft code base. And as we churn our objects, you're less affected by that, and you can get up and going on the new version faster. So using the hook pattern is good, where you put a single line of code in that calls out to your functionality, basically minimal modifications to our source. Better would be if you can use events to do the things you need to do. Start moving in that direction, and even if you can't get 100% of the way there, getting 80% of the way there, then you're well down that path to being set up to follow along with us as we continue to evolve. The second thing I would say is talking with a lot of partners. When we released extensions in NAV 2016, we got a lot of feedback from partners, especially ones that, as we were at Directions and people were seeing it for the first time, that it's great, but it'll never work for me. My solution's too complex. It'll never happen. But then we started talking with some of the very, very large partners that have huge solutions. And they started doing some things that we realized can work for a lot of people. The first is take a look at how much code is reused between your customers. If you've got 60% of the code that's common across all of your customers, take that 60% and make it extensions. Do the other 40% in source code modifications if you have to. Having that portion in an extension gives you a head start and gives you a leg up. And then when you go to approach a new customer, I've heard stories of where now that partners have done that, move their code to extensions for as much of it as they can. When they go to do a prototype for a new customer that they're trying to sell to, they can take that and put it in and then do a little bit of customization, and they can have a prototype up and running that very closely matches what the customer wants in hours instead of days. It cuts down that time because dropping the extension in is a trivial piece of work. The second thing that we've seen, especially with the huge solutions, is, yep, I've got an enormous vertical, and there's no way that makes sense to do as an extension. But when I look at what's in that vertical, I've got things like address verification as a part of it, credit card processing as a part of it, things that can be broken out and isolated. So rather than trying to create one huge extension, can I take my big source code customization that I drop on every customer and turn it into 8 different extensions? And again, even if that's only 2/3 of my code becomes those 8 extensions, now I have those 8 extensions that I can rapidly deploy, turn on and off depending on what the customer's needs are, and put those 8 in App Source for an additional source of revenue. And the last one, like we said, start to build extensions where possible. It's not always possible. Sometimes there's a piece of functionality or something really unique to your solution that's just not going to work. But if you can break out those pieces and start building them, you'll be ahead of the game and ready for us with the journey that we're going on. And one more thing.
Yes, one more thing before we go to Q&A, which we will still have time for. As I mentioned before, Visual Studio Code is also available on Mac and on Linux, and I actually brought one of those fancy things with me. We have actually made the extension you saw before also work on Mac, maybe also on Linux someday, but for now we have it working on Mac, and you get the same squiggly lines, whatever you would expect. We have build. The only thing we haven't gotten to yet is deployment, but that will be there. So We are now on multiple platforms for the development tools. And I think will leave us with Q&A
Yes.
for 15 minutes. Any questions?
Are you telling us to do all development as extensions?
So right now, I'm not telling you that you have to do everything as extensions. So far, we haven't taken away any of the existing tools you have. Everything you've ever done is still doable. We haven't removed anything. If you're targeting Dynamics 365, that has to be extensions right now. But you can see the way we've talked about some of the platform, potentially extensions may be everything someday. That's the direction we're going. How long it takes us to get there, I have no crystal ball to see when exactly that is yet, but that is the direction that we're moving. So it's very possible that someday that is the only way to do development. But again, there are tools that you need in place, and we don't have all those tools today.
In terms of upgrading, will there be tools for upgrading extensions that we created already in 2016, 2017 for the new environment? And how about handling all the translations and all the other parts that are part of extensions in 2017?
Yes. So we will have, we're working on a tool to create existing extensions over to work on the new platform. That won't be available for the December preview, but once we're ready to formally release it, we expect that tool to be available. It may not be 100% all the way over, but we should be able to get 80 to 90% of the way there. So you just have to go tweak a few things rather than rewrite from scratch. And we would expect then that the upgrade story, if you have, say, version 3 of your extension was built in Seaside and version 4 is built in Visual Studio Code, that you would be able then to upgrade that seamlessly at that point in time.
What about the translation?
Translation was supported in 2017. You can add translation files already today. What's currently available, and we're looking at changing the way we do that to make it a little more similar to resource files if you've used .NET language, to make that process a little simpler than it is today, but will still be supported going forward. Less PowerShell, yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Hi. What is the business model in the app stores?
So
how do I sell my extensions?
how do you make money in AppSource today? I have a bad answer for you. Right now, AppSource doesn't support commerce yet. So currently, you have to add whatever mechanism to your extension that you want in order to enforce that it's being paid for. What AppSource does do is when somebody downloads it, you get a lead notification in your CRM system, and you can direct contact that customer. But any checks, any billing, it currently is up to you. We are working with the AppSource team, telling them repeatedly that this is something that they need to provide. There needs to be one way for customers to get billed, and ideally they get one bill every month instead of one from us and one from every extension that they have. So it's something we're working on, but we don't have it yet.
Hi. You briefly mentioned debugging in Visual Studio Code. Is that some way you are going to move there? Are you going to debug in the Visual Studio Code?
Yes, Visual Studio Code also has a model for extending the debugging story, and we are going to use that as well to support debugging from within Visual Studio Code. It will not be there for the preview, but we know we can do it and we know how to do it. But the work is not done yet.
I have a question. When we are upgrading a customer from an earlier version and they have some customized fields in their tables, and we're going to use the extensions to do the new fields, how do we do with the upgrade process to get the new data or the old data into the new fields in the extension package?
So we don't have any tooling to support this currently. My recommendation would be, if you know you have customers in this scenario, to, when you do the base application upgrade, to split the fields that were custom to a new table, a separate table, and then on install the extension, check to see if that table is there and move that data into the extension table. And then once you do the next upgrade, you can drop that table because it should be empty at that point. So it's a little bit clunky right now. There's not a great tooling story around it, but that would be my recommendation.
We started trying to work with extensions and to divide our solution into several extensions, and we noticed that the different parts of extension can't see or communicate with each other. Is it? So the fields within extension 1 can't be seen from extension 2, although both extensions are in the same database. We can see both fields in the SQL server, but not from NAV. So could the customer, for example, see these new fields in his own lists or something like that?
Yes, so right now we support the concept of dependent extensions, and it's, again, one of these processes that today is difficult to work with. Instead of your baseline being W1 or your localization that you're working with, your baseline would be the code with the first extension in place. And if you use that as your baseline, then when you build the Navix file, the extension package, one of the flags on the commandlet is for dependencies, and you can point that to the other extension file that you're dependent on. And then that'll set up that dependency, which will do things like making sure that it's installed or published when you try to publish the one that has the dependency, making sure that, excuse me, if you're trying to install the one with the dependency, that the dependent extension gets installed. So if you have a pure dependency, that is supported today. The problem there, like I said, is you have to have the source code for the dependent extension in place while you're developing the second one. Going forward with the new tooling, because we will have access to metadata and symbols, you won't have to have that source in place, and it will be a much easier story going forward.
I would like to add on that, because as you saw in the demos, we were able to reference things from W1. The customer card, for instance, although I have no database access, I do not have the customer card as a part of my solution here. And we do that by having, files containing symbolic information. And basically the NavIm files also contain that kind of information. So what you will be able to do is to reference the other extension from in the app.json, and now suddenly the symbols are visible, fields added, other code units. So it's basically a reference model like, .NET references.
So one final thought on that is we've talked about how we do this in Dynamics 365, where if you're using an extension out there and you want to extend that you can download just the symbol information right from there. You never have to get the full package in order to be able to do that.
One question over here. To develop and deploy with Visual Studio Code, will you still need access to a developer's license?
So, I believe, so remember when I said all things subject to change in the future? All guaranteed promise is free or your money back. What we are trying to do is you will probably have to sign up for a developer program. You will get a tenant much like you do if you do a trial today, and you will be able to develop directly against that tenant in Dynamics 365. For Dynamics Nav, I don't know how the licensing model will change going forward. You saw in Esben's that we've gotten rid of a lot of IDs already. We'd like to get rid of all IDs, at least from the source file perspective. That obviously changes what's going to happen with licensing. I don't know how that's going to change going forward. But especially on Dynamics 365, we want to keep the barrier to entry as low as possible. Yeah. Free would obviously be as low as possible. I don't know if we can get there, but that's, we're trying to keep it down as much as we can.